Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now in the maybe most important poem in all of Leaves of Grass, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. We are now in cycle, what some scholars call cycle 2, sections 5 through 9. I'm going to borrow heavily in my comments on lilacs from the great Harold Bloom and his Western Canon, chapter 11. I think there's a whole lot going on there that he's going to emphasize, especially the use of the word passing as being so central. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist. Everything from the very first word come, and you'll remember the word tallying is used in those opening little epigraph type of lines. We're going to get to tallying later on in the fourth cycle of this poem. From inscriptions on, we've given a set of introductory comments to intro to the memories of President Lincoln, and as well a set of introductory comments to actually Lilacs itself. And of course, we've already worked with sections 1 through 4. Now, I just want to remind you that in this section number 2, this cycle 2, that we're working now with the journey of the coffin, as it's often referred to, from the countryside to the cities. We've been talking about the differences between those two, the rural and the urban, as well as representative of American life. We're going to have the sprig in the end that will be offered as his obituary tribute for all Americans, not only for himself. Whitman is going to address and begin to address, of course, the star and the bird. The sprig of lilac will be laid on the coffin, obviously metaphorically. The star will be identified with Lincoln in the song of the hermit thrush, which will help the poet begin to realize that the existence of Lincoln now can only be understood as spiritual. Let's begin in passage 5, and we'll work again like we've done before with a passage, and then we'll move on. Now, notice we'll begin with the word over. We got 3 different prepositions that will start 3 different sections of lilacs. Over the breast of the spring, the land amid cities, amid lanes, and through old woods, where lately the violets peeped from the ground, spotting the gray debris. Amid the grass in the fields, each side of the lanes, passing the endless grass, passing the yellowed speared wheat, every grain from its shroud, and the dark brown fields upriven, passing the apple tree blows of white and pink in the orchards, carrying a corpse to where it shall rest in the grave. Night and day journeys a coffin. Now, if passage 4 started with the preposition and, now it's over. And notice it's over the breast of the spring. Now, the use of the word breast has to take us back to Song of Myself 6, that whole idea of the breast of young men and all of that. The spring again taking us back to, of course, Easter. The land amid cities, so we've got both, the land as well as the cities, the urban as well as the rural. Amid will get used now, notice 3 times. Amid lanes and through old woods, notice the emphasis of the word old. Where lately the violets peeped, you'll remember this idea of violets. The picture here is powerful as well. It'll get used, the word violets will get used only one other time, warble for lilacs, later on in the poem, or in Leaves of Grass. Peeped will take us back to Song of Myself 43. From the ground, again, Leaves of Grass is the title of our poem, which makes this powerful. Spotting the gray debris. I told you guys that from drum taps on, color matters so much. Obviously, it matters so much in all Leaves of Grass, but for certainly here, right? Amid the grass, of course, Leaves of Grass, right? In the fields, each side of the lanes, we think about Song of the Open Road, passing the endless grass, passing, by the way, the use of the word passing is such an important part of understanding why I think Harold Bloom says it best, why Lilacs is central to a reading of all of the poetry of Leaves of Grass, taking us to the word tallying, and of course retrievements out of the night later in the poem. This idea of passing or moving beyond is going to be a big part of it. Notice, passing the yellowed speared wheat, so of course we're now into the prairies. Every grain from its shroud in the dark brown fields uprisen, the idea of resurrection. Passing the apple tree blows of white and pink in the orchards. All the colors, all the growing, and many have pointed out the sexual language as well, obviously, of this passage. carrying a corpse to where it shall rest in the grave, night and day. And then the Odyssey, right? Journeys, a coffin. 8 times in Lilacs the word coffin, by the way, does get used. And it begins passage 6. Coffin that passes through lanes and streets, through day and night. In other words, we got all these different polarities, right? With the great cloud darkening the land. This use of the word darkening happens 1 time in Leaves of Grass. This is its only use. Fascinating. Of course, the great cloud will take us back to references in the Old Testament, especially of Exodus and the great cloud that's and the pillar of fire and all of that. And then 11 times with the word with here. With the pomp of the interloped flags, with the cities draped in black. This will take us back to Song of Myself 26. Some corpse draped with black muslin. So you've got an echo there. With the show of the states, notice capitalized, with them, show of the states themselves, as of crepe-veiled women standing. It's interesting because literally there will be crepe-veiled women standing. And then, of course, there's a simile here with the use of as. With processions long and winding, and the flambeaux of the night. Remember all of the referencing to fires in drum taps. With the countless torches lit, again back to fires. With the silent sea of faces, all of the S sounds here. Silent sea of faces and the unbared heads. No one has their hat on to take their hat off. You'll remember we commented on the idea of hats. And the way that Whitman, in an earlier version, the 1855 version of the Song of Myself, will say, I will cock my hat any way I wish. Notice here, though, nobody has hats on. Respect, obviously. With the waiting depot, the arriving coffin, and the somber faces. By the way, only time somber gets used in all Leaves of Grass is right here. With dirges through the night. This dirges through the night will immediately take us to the final lines of Beowulf. We've given full lectures at LearnStrong.net. And Iliad 23 with the famous burial of Patroclus. We've given full lectures as well at LearnStrong.net. With the 1,000 voices, I told you guys about his use of this large numbers, right? 1,000 voices. Rising strong and solemn takes us back to I Hear America Singing. There are several moments in Lilacs when I Hear America Singing will be the poem that will echo for us backwards. With all the mournful voices of the dirges poured around the coffin. Again, the use of prepositions, around the coffin. The dim-lit churches, we'll think about some of those churches that we saw, for example, back in drum taps. And the shuddering organs. I love the use of shuddering here. It takes us back to Song of the Open Road 8. You'll remember it. The shuddering, longing ache of contact. Right here it's shuddering organs. Where amid these you journey. In other words, he speaks to Lincoln in the coffin, traveling back to, of course, Springfield. And how we're going past all these different types of America. With the toiling... He repeats himself. Tolling bells, perpetual clang. Now, I told you guys when we started our time together that I believe that T.S. Eliot was heavily influenced by Whitman, even though he said otherwise. And I think we can prove it when we look at Dry Salvages 1. Do you remember at the very end of Dry Salvages 1 and the groundswell that is and was from the beginning clangs the bell? Go back and take a look at what we have to say at LearnStrong.net about 4 quartets, and especially Burt Norton and our Dry Salvages 1, and just see the way in which I think there's a whole lot of lilacs in Dry Salvages, the most American, of course, of Eliot's 4 poems. Here, to place now an immediacy in section 6, coffin that slowly passes, I give you my sprig of lilac. Now, of course, the sprig of lilac will take us back to an earlier section in the poem. You'll remember at the conclusion of 3 when he says, a sprig with its flower I break. Now, Harold Bloom is going to make quite a bit of the autoeroticism of Leaves of Grass, and especially of Lilacs, and this whole thing of breaking and the sprig and all of that. I'll let you run that to ground on your own study. Passage 7 begins with parenthetics. Nor for you, for one alone, blossoms and branches green to coffins, all I bring. Notice the internal rhythm and rhyme here of green and bring as well. Notice the use of the word all. And again, notice this entire stanza is in a parenthetic. For fresh is the morning, thus would I chant a song for you, O sane and sacred death. Now this is interesting, the shift in the 7th section. Sane and sacred death. So now, from Lincoln particularly, and the death of Lincoln, we're going to have this amazing connection back to drum taps, and of course to the losses of the Civil War. For fresh is the morning, thus would I chant a song for you, O sane and sacred death. All over bouquets of roses, O death, I cover you over with roses and early lilies. Notice it's not lilacs here, it's lilies. But mostly, and now, there's our lilac. The lilac that blooms the first, copious I break. We're back to, of course, section 3. I break the sprigs from the bushes. With loaded arms I come, back to the original word of Leaves of Grass, pouring for you and the coffins, all of you, O death. So in this moment, in some interesting way, I told you, Leaves of Grass is a sustained theodicy. Why must there be terrible things that happen? Why must there be a war like the Civil War? Why must we have death like Lincoln's death? For Whitman, the poet here, the poet voice, in his elegy for Lincoln, he'll as well, it's brilliant, he'll as well capture all of the dead, especially the dead of the Civil War, right? All of the coffins. And now to passage 8, back to the use of the word O western orb sailing the heavens. So now we're back to the star and to Venus and all of that. Now, to give the immediacy, I know what you must have meant. Again, this notion of there's a certain kind of premonition that the poet will speak of. As a month since I walked, and again, we're back to the power of walking in Leaves of Grass. 11 times now with this word as. As a month since I walked, as I walked in silence, the transparent, shadowy night. The use of the word night, 28 times in Lilacs, the word gets used. It's compelling. And this line makes us think, of course, of learned astronomer. As I saw, you had something to tell as you bent to me night after night. As you drooped from the sky low down, as if to by my side, and then parenthetics, while the other stars all looked on, in parenthetics, as I wandered together the solemn night. Again, back to this notion of solitary. For something I know not what kept me from sleep. In other words, in parenthetics. In other words, the bard, right? In the old traditional sense, the prophet. I had a sense, I had a feeling that something really bad was about to happen. As the night advanced, and I saw on the rim of the west how full you were of woe. By the way, this advancing, night advancing, will take us to the word past and passing again and again throughout this poem. By the way, the use of the word woe has to take us back to Milton's Paradise Lost, of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, which brought death into the world and all our woe. We've given full lectures on all of Paradise Lost back at learnstrong.net. Go back and look at the way in which Paradise Lost heavily influenced, I think, what we're doing here in Lilacs. As I stood on the rising ground, notice, of course, the idea of that knoll from Song of Myself 46, in the breeze in the cool, transparent night. Again, back to this idea of night. As I watched where you passed, watching and looking is central, right, to all of Leaves of Grass. Where you passed and was lost in the nether word back. The only use of this word, nether word, is right here. And of course, it immediately makes us think of our Dante. As my soul in its trouble dissatisfied sank, as where you, sad orb, concluded, drooped or dropped, however you wish to read it, in the night, and was gone. We're going to comment on the power of Tennyson, I think, to much of these lines. And then finally, to end cycle 2, the 9th section, sing on there in the swamp. So now notice we go from the netherward to the swamp, and we're immediately thinking again of our Dante, and of course now the bird. Oh, singer, bashful and tender, and immediately we think of Keats's Nightingale, tender as the night, right? I hear your notes, I hear your call, I hear, notice the repetition, I hear, I come, again the first word of Leaves of Grass, presently, and then I understand you. By the way, this takes us to the poem To You. None has understood you, but I understand you. We're back to that. But a moment I linger, remember linger as I pondered in silence, I linger, for the lustrous star has detained me. The star my departing comrade holds and detains me. By the way, this use of lustrous 3 times will get used in Lilacs. This idea of comrade all of a sudden will remind us that we saw this from the very beginning. Do you remember in starting from Pomanog that we saw comrade for the very first time? And I think its resonances work here for us, so I'll go back to it for just a moment. Do you remember this? He says at the end of section 6 of starting from Pomanog, I will write the evangel poem of comrades and of love, for who but I should understand love with all its sorrow and joy, and who but I should be the poet of comrades. And between comrades and camarero, obviously we've seen it a number of times, and here we are again. The star my departing comrade holds and detains me. This idea then that Whitman is going to argue as the great poet, there's something I had a feeling about as it happened. At 2A messages here, well, sometimes it is the poet, it is the artist, is the only one who can really sing in the middle of this night, this passing night. And of course, as the train is passing all of the towns, right? At 2B, I love that night is used so many times in this poem, because then when light and day and sun is referenced, we're going to have remarkable opposites that will be played there. Obviously, his repetition of comrade throughout Leaves of Grass is central as well at 2B. And the power of the word passing, again and again, we're going to see this all the way through. Both the train is passing, and of course, our sorrow is passing as part of his theodicy. I mentioned Dante, obviously, in Milton, but I just want to remind you of Tennyson's In Memoriam, and that collection of poems. We've spoken about this at learnstrong.net. But you remember in passage 27 when he says it this way, I envy not in any moods the captive void of noble rage, the linnet born within the cage that never knew the summer woods. I envy not the beast that takes his license in the field of time unfettered by the sense of crime to whom a conscience never wakes, nor what may count itself as blessed, the heart that never plighted troth, but stagnates in the weeds of sloth, nor any want-begotten rest. I hold it true, whate'er befall. I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Certainly lines that I think Whitman will be working with, at least at some point in his writing of the great elegy, Lilacs, finally at 3B. How are we going to own this second cycle, this second section of 5 through 9? Well, I think one of the questions is, when was the last time that you had a kind of a sense that something bad, a premonition that something bad was coming, and then it finally happened? And how did you reconcile the fact that I had this feeling, And finally, do you agree with Tennyson, 'tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all? Certainly, I think Whitman would be making that argument in his, what do we call it, sustained theodicy. Thank you.